For today's episode, we're taking you to the racetrack. I'm Charley Wilson, your host and the Executive Director of the Southern California Water Coalition. And what you're about to hear was recorded live at Santa Anita Park in Arcadia in January 2026. We had a full house of about 300 water, business, and community leaders for a candid conversation with the people who help keep water flowing to 19 million Southern Californians. On stage with me, Adán Ortega Jr., Chairman of the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, and Shivaji Deshmukh, the Metropolitan's new General Manager. We talked about the next 100 years of water in Southern California. What happens if we don't fix aging infrastructure? How to plan for climate whiplash on the Colorado. Why giant projects like recycling and new conveyance aren't actually the biggest drivers of your water bill, and why your tap water is still cheaper than bottled water, maybe unrealistically so. And underneath all of this is a simple question. Can Metropolitan invest enough to keep the system reliable and still keep water affordable and trusted for the people who depend on it? This is a special live episode from Santa Anita Park. Let's get into the conversation.
So, Michael, thank you for that. And so now that you guys have had a chance to sort of let my questions seep in, it's going to be really good, right? And no, Shivaji, here's advice. I was once told by a city manager, right, with a council of 5, you could afford to have 2 bad days a month. I've had my 2 bad days. Just take that advice with a large board like yours. I don't know if they're going to give you 15 or 20 bad days. All right. So, Mr. Ortega,
well,
my
thank
apologies.
You. What's changed in the last 100 years? Dealing with the Colorado River issues, and if you look at what's happening in the Delta, when our vast water distribution systems were built 100 years ago, it had a very clear purpose. And it was a purpose that was identified by the captains of industry and society. It was the Chamber of Commerce that founded Metropolitan. And the purpose of Metropolitan was explicitly to provide a conveyance from the Colorado River, we call it the Colorado River Aqueduct, in order to promote growth and prosperity in Southern California. So almost 100 years later, as you're dealing with the Colorado River and you're wondering, like, why is it so difficult to come to an agreement? And the reason is that in 100 years, we've all evolved. Yes, California was expected to grow, and we did. And the other states have grown at different rates. But what we've all done is that we've really transformed our reasons for needing the water. So there's some projections. The Municipal Water District of Orange County did a study not too long ago, and they're projecting 0 growth for the next 25 years, or zero added demands of water for the next 25 years. We can grow without using more water. We've been able to prove that. So now the reason we need this water is a measure of security for our economy. It's in order to sustain the quality of life. It's not necessarily the equation that more water means more growth. And so we're in a position now where the world is changing. You know, you might want to think about climate change, but we've been doing a lot in the water community, all of you have, to create that account of resilience that we need through all of the efficiencies that we've created. And so now it's about water security. It's about, sustainability, but it's also about cementing what we have in order to be able to count on a future. The opposite side of that is that if we do not address the key issues that we have before us right now with aging infrastructure and other things, we're quickly in danger of going back to the beginning. So we can talk about that a little bit more, but I think Shivaji deserves a shot at that question from where he sees it and as the new general manager.
Well, and it's, you've been in the industry for some time. Clearly, a month is probably not enough time to talk about the next 100 years. But given your experience, how do you see this role changing with Metropolitan?
Thanks, Charlie. One of the things that I'm just so grateful for from the board chair and the rest of the board of directors at Metropolitan is the ability to onboard for a couple months while overlapping with our former general manager, Devin Upadhyay. What that afforded me was an ability to look and observe at the agency without the responsibility of actually managing it. And 2 months was a long time for that. And it really feeds into where Metropolitan needs to change. On Jan 5th, first day in the office, first day in my new role, I was able to leverage that time and think about this specific question. The board has set us up for a lot of success. They've set us up and the agency by establishing a framework to evaluate projects through an updated planning tool, Camp for Water, Climate Adaptation, Master Planning for Water. We have an opportunity now to look at what Metropolitan has already been extremely successful at in managing imported water supplies, being a financial backstop for the development of local supplies, specifically recycled water. But we also have to recognize that the next 100 years is not going to be like the past, whether that's hydrology, whether that's workforce. And we're at this pivotal time now with great tools, not only that planning tool, out of a long, challenging litigation environment that Metropolitan was in. We look at the bright side out of that process. Thanks to the leadership of this board, we have an opportunity to look at exchanging supplies within the Metropolitan family. This is unprecedented. We have the ability now to look at developing our own supplies, as many of our member agencies and sub-agencies have done, with expanding groundwater production or recycled water. And we're looking at partnerships on a grand scale with LA County Sanitation, with the Pure Water Southern California program. So to me, this really reflects this change that Met that's taking place at Met right now. But what's really important, and I just want to add on to the chair's comment, is that we can't abandon that commitment to the existing operation and infrastructure. And one of my initial observations was that as a member agency, as somebody who understands Met from the outside, you know the value of an intake system, pumps, aqueducts, but it's extremely difficult to understand the engine that is required to make all of that work. Maintaining a road system in the middle of the Mojave Desert just to have access to facilities that are 1.5 hours away from the nearest town is extremely complex. And so I think we'll come back to it, but I am very sensitive to the need to make sure we protect that existing infrastructure and operation.
Well, Don, I'm going to come back to you because it was mentioned as chairman, and I know that it's the last couple of years have not been the smoothest of all things. And really, as the 800-pound gorilla at Metropolitan, a lot is expected, and that requires leadership. And so I'm going to ask you as chairman, how do you think the role of board leadership has evolved as these water challenges have become more complex, more expensive, and really much more visible to the public? I mean, it used to be for a lot of us in the room, so long as the water came on, you could just kind of operate in the shadows and nobody really cared. That's not the case anymore. I mean, you're really front and center in a way that Metropolitan, given the 100-year anniversary coming, hasn't been for almost 100 years.
Well, Metropolitan has evolved in a very, I think, unique way to create a structure that is very unique in California governance. So, for example, many people will presume that Metropolitan has a CEO, and people take it for granted that the general manager acts as the CEO. What we had was a culture that created great affinity between our early general managers, general counsels, board chairs. And if you look at the first third of Metropolitan's history, we didn't have that many. They had proteges that followed them. And the proteges had proteges as well that had links to the founders of Metropolitan. And that ended with the tenure of Ron Gastelum, who was the last of the proteges of the proteges. And so Metropolitan's board has, kind of bumped along in meeting the reality that there's no natural affinity necessarily when somebody comes in from the outside to be the general manager or to be the ethics officer, which is a office that didn't exist. And we have 4 direct reports. And so we've been trying to draw the balance now on how to function with that legacy, and make best use of those checks and balances that we have within our organization. Because as a board, we're 38 members. We're spread. We used to be 52. We're spread from Ventura down to the Mexican border. We have committees. We meet a couple of times a month. We have an executive committee. But one of the dynamics that didn't hit me for a long time is when I first became chair, I wanted to have, like in the legislature, I wanted to have, meetings that ran in parallel so the two committees could meet at once, and the board didn't want it. And after watching the dynamics, I understand clearly why. You have individuals that are driving great distances from some of our member agencies, from the far reaches of the Inland Empire, from Ventura County, all the way to the Mexican border. And they're there the whole day. So they attend all the meetings. And so one of the things that we did during the time of instability that you described is that we acted as a committee of the whole. The meetings would be the executive committee joint meeting with the board of directors so that everybody was in the room as we took every step, for example, in hiring the new general manager or in doing some of the harder things that we had to do prior to that. And I think that realization has really brought our board together. And I'm very proud to have the opportunity to lead it through this period, because I think it's been a realization for all of us that we don't have to have the kind of factionalism and disputes that existed for so many years that were exacerbated by the COVID epidemic.
So, Shivaji, you sort of talked about it a little bit about the luxury of having a couple of months to sort of shadow Devin before he formally left. And because you have led sizable regional institution and been a part of other traditional water agencies, give me just a quick glimpse, if you would, what you immediately recognized as what was going to be different leading Metropolitan today compared to sort of where you came from.
I think many of the issues we have at Metropolitan are pretty consistent with most water agencies out there. What I'm concerned about is the loss of institutional knowledge. It's important everywhere in the water and wastewater industry. At Metropolitan, the way we operate, the equipment we have, doesn't have comparison. And once again, it's a realization that it really gets magnified when you're responsible for the entity and you're flying out to Eagle Mountain and seeing that one pump repair requires a certain level of skill set that you just can't find anywhere else. It really feeds into workforce development and us thinking about how we shape for that next generation. The other challenge we have is what reliability means and how that translates into resources, not only technical resources, not only internal resources, but the water community as a whole. We're put in a position now to lead that. And I think Metropolitan has always done a really good job this. But as we mentioned before, as the environment's changing, the work's changing, we've got to make sure we're adapting. And I'm pretty confident we're on the right path, but now it's going to be my job to help sustain that. And I take that responsibility very seriously.
So, Adán, Shivaji touched on in his opening comments, though. One of the things that you have adopted, and you put a lot of time, a lot of energy in developing, is this, climate adaptation master plan, camp for water. A lot of people would sort of going through the early process, like, yeah, another fad, this thing will never take. And here we are, right? It's taken, it's part of, and it's now integrated into the decision-making process. So how does that represent for you the shift from just reacting to droughts to actually planning permanent climate volatility?
Well, the bond rating agencies gave us high marks for having probably the first of its class risk management planning process in the water industry. We're one of the highest rated agencies in the state of California of all types. And what Camp for Water represents is adaptation in its truest form. Farmers have been doing it forever. They have to have a a tool shed with all of these tools at their disposal, because they never know what the weather's going to do from year to year and how the crops are going to bloom and when the rain is going to fall. And they've been doing this, since early mankind. Well, we have to do this at a broader scale now because water is essential. The 19 million people that weren't here 100 years ago are here now, and it's our job to take care of them. And so some people think that Camp for Water is a validation tool for a class of projects. So for example, you have NGOs that believe that Camp for Water only justifies demand management programs like water recycling and conservation. And then you have others who are big believers in infrastructure who believe that Camp for Water will validate things like delta conveyance and sites reservoir and desalination and things that are more supply driven. But if you're a farmer, you know that you can't just rely on one set of tools. And so what we hope to do with Camp for Water is to create portfolios of projects that can carry the region for the next 100 years. And I'll say one more thing about this. If you look at all the projects that are out there, delta conveyance that we've been talking about for decades, sites reservoir, delta conveyance, pure water, name them all. I would suggest that even if we had the money to do them all at the same time, I think the lesson is we probably shouldn't do it because the conditions may not warrant their need in the way that we thought 20 years ago. We got to have a metric by which we create portfolios where we stage projects so that when we need them, we can have them happen.
So I got to follow up then to that from a board's vantage point. How do you evaluate the risk when the payoff horizon is measured in decades, not in a hydrology cycle or even an election cycle?
I think that is the biggest challenge for the water industry, and it's governed by a very befuddling paradox about the value proposition of what we do. The fact of the matter is that water relative to other utilities is very cheap. I mean, think about in Orange County, where I live, my property tax bill, after we doubled the ad valorem property tax, is about $67. You don't even notice it if you compare it to schools and sanitation and everything else. The volumetric rate on average in the region is about a third of a penny per gallon, right? And like Michael said, we live in a region where the same people that complain about that being too high are drinking a $5 bottle of Evian, which is several thousand% more than that tap water. So we live in this paradox today, and I think it blinds us to the possibilities. It's even more urgent that we resolve that paradox when it comes to what it's going to take to maintain our infrastructure. There are scenarios where we have 80-year-old transformers on the system. There's scenarios where if one of them or a few of them fail, we have to cannibalize the rest of the system because it takes 4 years to replace them. And so if you think this through, what we're really talking about is that if we don't have a tool like Camp for Water that's creating portfolios, that's anticipating the needs, before too long, we may be down to intermittent service. We may have to be telling our cities that they need to take health and safety measures for those hours of the day when water's not going to come out of every faucet in your home. There's places in the world that know how to live that way. And so those are the choices. And so as you see us deal with the issue of how we're going to pay for Camp for Water, how we're going to pay for the projects, we're going to be very honest with you in a way that I think people are not used to. Because what you're going to reckon with is that if we can't mitigate these risks for you as member agencies, as retail agencies, you're going to have to make the difference. And you have to evaluate whether you could do it cheaper than we can and whether you could do it as well. So that's the overall Camp for Water top to bottom.
Well, and that's as complex, right? Now, a lot of people get it. And as you say, we've never actually gone without. And I think from a matter of trust, right? Yeah, people kind of yawn and say, "Oh, sure, right, right. You're just trying to, milk the system." And so the issue of public trust becomes important. So that's where, Shivaji, I'm gonna come back to you, because as we're sitting here talking about it, we have on the list a portfolio of some of the most ambitious water investments in the nation. And as Adán, that we may need, we may not need. We certainly can't afford all of them and all at one time. So you have to go through a process like Camp for Water to prioritize. But at the same time, what we hear both at the national level, and that cascades for good, bad, or indifferent, all the way down to our local ratepayers, this issue of affordability has become really top of mind and become part of the political conversation, which doesn't always adhere to facts. So I guess the question I have for you is then, how do you see Metropolitan being able to balance the urgency of that long-term investment and that infrastructure against the real economic pressure that's facing households today? And all of these folks in the room love to point the finger and say, well, sorry about the rate increase, but those guys that made me do it.
Charlie, I think it's even though Chair did a great job describing Camp for Water, I want to transition off for Camp for Water with using an example that'll come out of this year. We don't know what to expect on the Colorado River. We have to be prepared, and the discussions that we're having internally are not tens of thousands of acre feet difference, it's hundreds of thousands of acre feet difference. So having a planning process that allows for flexibility to adapt to those kind of changes is more crucial now than ever. That leads into this portfolio development and these options that we have. It used to be, I think, affordability meant dollars per acre foot. Affordability is way more complex and nuanced than that. There are projects that are within our control. There are projects outside of our control. There are still projects that rely on the hydrologic cycle. There are some that rely on drought-proof supplies like toilet water. We have to be prepared for all of those. And I think we have to agree, or at least narrow in on a common definition for affordability. I think between Michael pointing that out in his welcoming statement, the chair pointing out that we provide an amazing service at less than a penny a gallon, we have to talk about what true affordability means. And to me, that means more investment in our systems, more investment in new reliable supplies, mixed with outreach to let our customers know that there's a value in the tap, rather than shifting and relying on less regulated, potentially or clearly more expensive water supplies. And I think that coordinated effort is going to set a better tone for what affordability means. It's not to mean that we should just be spending on every project, and ideally, even if we had that headroom to do that. But this is really where the idea of having flexibility and a suite of options available. And this is where I do feel Metropolitan over the last few years has done a great job in setting us up for success. Now it's our time to execute and see whether it's Delta Conveyance, Sites Reservoir, Pure Water, existing or protection of existing infrastructure of our own system with set supplies, and balancing all that. And then ultimately me representing staff and bringing that to the board for those important policy decisions. That's really what I envision over the next couple of years.
May I jump in here?
Yeah,
Charlie?
please.
So for all of that, DCP, Pure Water, Sites Reservoir would not be the major cost drivers for the price of water. The major cost drivers are the billions of dollars that water agencies spend, sometimes without even knowing that they would have to spend it, to treat for the contaminants of concern that are constantly being revised. And we don't even talk about that. It's what adds the heft to our water rates. And what I think makes it even worse is that we have a regulatory process and system that feeds distrust in domestic water. I believe that those consumer confidence reports are the opposite. they have the opposite effect. They're the consumer lack of confidence report. Try reading it. I mean, I was in the community of Cudahy just a few weeks ago, where they were talking about a consolidation scenario. And there were all these like, well, we're going to think of consolidating you with these little systems that are in Cudahy with an investor-owned utility or with, and as the conversation went on, the residents said, well, what happened to the discussion about water quality? Right. And they don't understand it. And so I think the industry has to evolve to the point where we need to become more sophisticated on putting forth our value proposition and less shy about talking about the things that sow distrust in municipal water. And then the water industry has to take responsibility for those pockets where people don't have safe drinking water. We have to own that. And we run away from it right now.
Well, that's part of that local elected process. So I'm going to stay with you for a minute and I'm going to draw from your history because we're sitting here talking about Metropolitan as a board having to make major investments in a variety of things. And ultimately, those are policy decisions, which means they're political in nature. And we know how easy that is to get 38 people to agree. I'm looking to you and your history. Can you point to an example in the past 20 to 30 years where some of those kind of decisions were clearly translated into greater water security? So we can take sort of the positive and sort of and bring it forward.
Well, I think Diamond Valley Lake is the most obvious one. In fact, Shivaji was at an event just a few days ago, along with our directors, breaking ground on a facility that's going to make sure that we can pump water from Diamond Valley Lake, which is in Riverside County, all the way up to Ventura County. And it'll work both ways. It's an innovation that adds more water security to an area that in 2022 saw itself subject to severe reductions because of a zero allocation from the state. I think that's the most recent accomplishment towards that, but it leverages what we built almost 25 years ago, Diamond Valley Lake. I think the other projects that I'm very proud to be associated with, Shivaji and I are both alum of West Basin Municipal Water District. I'm also an alum of Central Basin Municipal Water District. And there were the early, dense urban water recycling projects. I know Orange County has a lot to be proud of because of what they've done with the groundwater replenishment system. That's the water I drink in Orange County. And those provide a lot of value and security.
All right, Shivaji, you're the guy that gets to then oversee the staff and try to make these things work. So tell me then, how do you measure success that resonates beyond just economists and engineers? What is it that we can take to the public that says, okay, these are the kind of successes, this is the kind of thing that we're looking for, so that when we reach those objectives, we can be able to celebrate and again, bridge that trust issue with our public, because we're really good. I mean, let's admit it, right? Around the room. We're really good about being the smartest guys at the table when we're all around the table, but we're all talking to each other. And here we're talking about how do we get out, because we've got a public that's not keeping pace with where we know the industry and where the issue is. So how do you develop and how do you see success? How do you quantify success?
I think outreach and communication is still a novel concept in our industry. I think it's only a couple decades old. I think we used to do a good job. We're doing a lot better job. But I do see a lot of opportunity now in the position of Metropolitan GM. I think one of my initial observations is one of the problems with Met staff is that, and this is reflective of the water industry, is they make it look easy. As a Met member agency 2 times, and then as a sub-agency who have for 27 years has worked with Metropolitan, I really had this, maybe it was an overconfidence that I would understand how the system works. It is extremely more complex and requires so much more than I realized. And I think we need to connect this and marry this to better ways to communicate and utilize member agencies as our partners to share the story. There's a position in Eagle Rock that to me is almost literally orchestrating how water flows over hundreds of square miles. And the thought and planning and effort that it takes to make this happen, it's inspiring. And I didn't realize that. I had the fortune of working closely with a number of Met colleagues, people who have retired from there. You hear stories about it, but to see it up close, it's really just game changing in terms of how you look at the water industry. We need to translate that even better to our member agencies and partner with them how to get out to our diverse communities and say how hard this is to do, why it should be exciting to invest more into our system. And one of the things that I feel we have now more than ever, I really appreciate when the chair identifies this. He's done this publicly a lot. We've had conversations about it, but it'll be a missed opportunity if I don't take advantage of the 26 member agencies and the way we all work together. They've always been extremely impressive leadership at the member agencies. But from my observation, it's never been a way where we speak extremely candid together. We enjoy being around each other. I'm the 27th of all of them, and how to utilize that. And if I don't, I think that's going to be the opposite of success on my part. So I'm really excited to leverage that and utilize that to tell the story of Met to get that extra support.
All right, well, let me dig in on that a little bit, Adán, right? Let's also realize, let's be really blunt about it. We also operate in a very highly political environment. And I've seen in my tenure, so many people come to the table, particularly when you start talking about a project, like that's my project, that's my silver bullet, and therefore I got to have that, but not that. And as you're getting into your camp for water, sort of how do you holistically view the system? How much does politics really play in the decision making? And I know you've gone through a lot of work, a lot of board, and you also have a lot of new board members. I mean, there's constantly turnover at your board as well. And so people come in with a different level of knowledge and experience. So how much do politics play in this? And then how do you, as the board chair, so how do you, and the next chair, how do you herd those cats?
So, as a former Chief Deputy Secretary of State, I do not believe that politics is a sin. Our founders created our system so that we would have an ability to deliberate complex issues and come up with solutions. Technology, as time has passed, changed the nature of how people discuss big issues. And it also created a very performative aspect to political life. I think that if you've ever seen the series Deadwood, it's about the West when the West was South Dakota, and how it was in the early stages, right before the telegraph was invented, and people would come through town and they would talk about things changing, and it would create land speculation, and people would do crazy things. I didn't really get it until I started comparing it to what's going on right now. And so I think that there's a difference between the kind of discourse that we've had versus what could be a healthy political system that relies on informed decisions. And we haven't been able to get that right as a society. But I think that in the microcosm of water, we've made a real attempt to do that, at least at Metropolitan. We have information items that would come maybe up to 3 times the Delta conveyance. I think we had 4 different presentations and discussions with our board about that. You look at Camp for Water, it took 2 years to get that off the ground. But I think that the industry also has to identify who are the stewards of that information. So prior to the search for a new general manager, I was going around telling people that I believe that the member agency managers, and this includes those at the retail level, are the equivalent of the founders of Metropolitan. The founders of Metropolitan were the Chamber of Commerce. Who's in a position to recognize what the system needs and what society needs? Who sits in that nexus between those of us that make policy and the people that make the day-to-day demands through connections and the services that our agencies provide. It's the member agency managers. And I think that if we rely on their expertise to inform us, even when they disagree, we need to do that. And then the final thing is, and I'm very passionate about this, is that I think you have to listen to everybody. I mean, I think this idea that information is power, and that if you just keep the information to yourself so that you can lob it at the right time to get the outcome that you want, that it's a real disservice to the way we make decisions on a political level. Having everybody in the room, we at Metropolitan have made some tough decisions. We've had some very difficult situations, but everybody saw the angst behind it. And in the end, when we made the final decisions, some of them were through big vote of consensus, and others were unanimous. But you do that by working with each other, by being informed, and then also by having good faith when you're dealing with your colleagues.
So, okay, now we throws that ball back over the net to staff. So here we are in the issue of, in a political environment, it really boils down to the issue of public trust. So, Shivaji, you've been in the staff leadership position. Where do you see the transparency, the communication, the public engagement at Metropolitan? Where do you see that, and where is that in your internal order of priority, right? Is that equal to engineering and design, and where does that fit in being able to bring the public to be able to make for the board to make an informed choice?
I don't think it competes with anything, Charlie, as much as it's a value that clearly the board is aligned on. And at the staff level, then it's my responsibility to embed that value into the culture or the fabric of the organization. And transparency is part of that. I agree with the chair in terms of our ability to listen. The model, and I'll use my first board meeting a couple of weeks ago as an example. We had a recommendation going to the board. I had 3, maybe 4 general managers or water managers reach out. Shivaji, these are my concerns, X, Y, and Z. Can you consider that? It wasn't a last minute request. Since I started, they were very clear about that. Our staff responded, brought the recommendation to the board, and unanimous support for it. That's the process that works between Metropolitan and the member agencies. That's the process I plan and hope to facilitate through my tenure. There's another level when it comes to the public. We're still a public entity with sub-agencies and sub-agencies that have their own communities. And I think we've done a great job respecting that each one of our areas, each one of our counties, each one of our 26 member agencies, and even within them, they have such a diverse community that there's no way we can go in and target a kind of blanket approach to outreach. That evolution needs to take place constantly. Our team does a great job with that. But for me, adding on to what the chair said, is the accessibility of Met staff represented by me is important now. So whatever the group, whether it's business, the environmental, other stakeholders, allowing us to be accessible is something that we'll continue to prioritize.
All right. So our time is kind of sort of coming to a close. We got to be mindful of that. So I want to ask Adán, so all of this, again, with that backdrop of 100-year anniversary coming, what do you think Southern Californians should remember about Metropolitan's direction over the next decade when you guys are finished with your tenure?
Well, I'm going to be done by the end of December 31st
Not that you're counting days or anything,
of
but
this year. What I hope will come of it is that I see Metropolitan's history in thirds. There was the founding third that I described earlier with the founders. We've reached, I believe, the end of the middle third with the departure of Devin Upatahi, who really facilitated this new era. And the board, we have so many board members that are unburdened by the history of, for example, the San Diego IID litigation. I worked really hard to try to resolve that litigation, and the board bought the settlement by unanimous vote, and it changed the business model. And I think that when you heard Shivaji describe that we can now exchange water within the metropolitan system amongst member agencies, that's a huge change to our business model. And what it really represents about Southern California is that we're wringing every ounce of efficiency out of our system. What it says is San Diego can be overproducing desalinated water and pure water. And it gives them great reliability, but at a huge cost burden that their ratepayers are concerned about. Now they can spread that risk through the metropolitan system. Our responsibility, what we got back for that, was an increase in our fixed revenues. I'm very proud that by the end of my chairmanship, I'm betting on having over 50% of our revenues on a fixed basis for the first time, which gives us enormous flexibility to do other things. And so I think stability is, I hope, a hallmark or at least a foundation for that stability. My fear, though, is that it could go the other way. My fear is that the failure of making this value proposition during my final months, that what will happen is it'll be a race to the bottom. We've kicked the can on water rate increases for 10 years. We have operators in our system working in harsh conditions in 120-degree weather for 16-hour shifts for 30 straight days. It's unsustainable. And if we cannot have the resources that we need to give them the kind of working conditions and hours that are tolerable for a human being in those conditions, then it's going to come back to the region in another way. We might have to say to you, or somebody, not me, somebody might have to say to you, you know what? Because of our shortage of operators or our shortage of corrosion control technicians, we can only operate the system for so many hours a day, which means that there's only going to be so much water in the reservoirs, which means that you have to plan for that, especially if you don't have sources other than imported water. And so my hope is that that's not where it goes. We're going to work really hard between now and May. The directors of Metropolitan are going to be inviting members of their community or their boards to come visit the facilities with us to see what we're talking about when it comes to our equipment. And we hope that you will take advantage of that and come see for yourself before you direct your Met representative on whether to support the kind of increases that we're going to need.
Shivaji, any comment on that before I go? What one thing in Met's direction for the next decade? What would be the crowning achievement?
The workforce. I got to add this, Charlie. I know we are short on time. Grew up in this industry with an on appreciation for Metropolitan staff. You can say names and people know who they are, and that instills credibility. Many of them are in this room. And through retirements, through culture change, we've lost that institutional knowledge, and gaining that back is more important. We can't do that at the expense of our member agencies or the industry. We have to do it collectively, because you need all the right people in the right places to make this work. And so for me, that's going to be a priority. But once again, Met's in a unique position because the way we operate, it's really, really hard to find those people, and we train them ourselves, and the board has stayed committed to this. But we have to sustain that and bring Met staff back in and create this succession plan that gives the board and the community comfort that we're ready to take on the operation of our system.
All right, well, I appreciate that. Now, the last time I interviewed the general manager when he was new to Metropolitan, I made him cry. So this is my lightning round, and I need both of you to answer these questions for me. And this is what we're going to finally wrap up with, because it wouldn't be a What Matters Water TV and Podcast if I didn't ask you something goofy and made you react instantaneously. So, both of you, quickly, what's the one water myth that you still hear at dinner parties or out in social gatherings that makes you wince?
Water's refined.
That our water is not drinkable out of the tap.
What's a good day at Metropolitan for the general manager?
Today.
Well, I love that. All right, as board chair, what part of the job takes more time and energy than anybody might actually expect. Why'd you raise your hand, and what surprised you when they actually gave you the chairmanship?
I don't know. I'll have to tell you when I'm done.
What's the best question you've been asked by a member agency or a member of the public, Shivaji?
Is the plane just for me?
All right.
And it's
Adán,
no, the answer.
what's the one thing, Adán, that gives you optimism about Southern California's water future right now?
The general managers.
Very good. And 10 years from now, what would make you say we did our job?
I got a lot of answers. Sorry. Yeah. That's it. Top of my list right now is certainty on the Colorado.
Are you sure you don't want to cry at this point? I'm asking that kind of question.
Not
good.
yet, not
it's
yet.
good TV. Come on.
Okay.
All right. Adán, how about you? 10 years from now, what would make them say, hey, I did my job?
People trust tap water.
Very good. Ladies and gentlemen, Adán Ortega, Shivaji Deshmukh.
Thank you.
For What Matters Water TV and Podcast, thank you for being with us. I'm going to come back with some closing comments in just a minute.
Well, thanks for joining us on What Matters Water TV and Podcast. We are proud to have brought you these important conversations for the past 4 years. If you like today's discussion, please go to wherever you download your podcasts and give us a 5-star rating. If you're on YouTube, subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us build our presence and continue to grow. If you're interested in helping sponsor this program, we love you. Please reach out to us at socalwater.org and send us a message. And as we close out today's show, like all of our shows, I leave you with this challenge. Be a part of the conversation. Be a part of the solution. At the Southern California Water Coalition, we educate to advocate. So as public policy leaders have difficult choices, together we help them make informed decisions. Thanks for being with us, and we will see you next time on What Matters Water TV and Podcast.